Nick, to answer your question, I'm going to answer it again. The reason I suggest the plugins in Ableton, it's not so much about using specifically Ableton plugins. It's that I started producing when software had just gotten good enough to where you didn't need any hardware to produce. And it's improved exponentially. The options have become infinitely more available over the last time. And as a result, that's great news, except for new producers. The last thing that I want you to have as a new producer is to look at this gigantic wall of options, and then say, I don't know where to start. So I'm just overwhelmed. I don't know how any of this works. I tried, I give up. And so the more basic that you can get, the less likely the chances are that it just becomes this overwhelming process. Man, Peter, Chris Ferguson, all in the house, longtime friends of mine. Peter's one of the people that I have worked for many years with now, and am a resident at his club night in Frankfurt called Straight. Hope to be back in Frankfurt again soon. Chris Ferguson's one of my best friends from my childhood that we've stayed in touch. So good to have you all here. What I would suggest doing, and the reason I pulled up a preset, is that especially with the operator preset, the nice thing about it is that you can start working backwards. I had talked about this in a previous workshop. So when you pull up operator just on its own, I'll show you what it's going to sound like. It's going to sound like basically sounds like a little dial tone or a hearing test. That is a sine wave. That's all that is. So now you know what a sine wave sounds like. And so we're going to go back to the preset because that's already now we've got something that you can already work with. And the nice thing about Ableton in this specific plugin is we can start working backwards. So let's start taking this all away. Sounds pretty close to what we started with. And if I pitch that down, it's pretty close. But if we get all this stuff back up and going, then we've got a proper chord sound, right? So let's start just taking away oscillators and see what we've got. And just look at this, let's look at this oscillator. Now we got a sine wave. And if you go through, here's the different waveforms that you can choose from with the oscillator. So, and then once you've selected that, you can go through and hello, Heather from Nice. So now we've got, you can kind of hear obviously the difference between all these. And if you want to get really crafty, the nice thing about operator is you can actually draw in your own waveform. So and you can just hear what it's doing the whole time. So let's go back to square 32. Now let's add this other oscillator. A big thing that you're hearing, this is also a, it's not a square wave, sorry, I'm messing up. It's a saw wave. A big change that you're hearing is the tuning. So when you've got two different oscillators working together and you slightly adjust the tuning, it radically changes the sound. So I'm just holding one note. Let's go down, let's take this fine tuning down here, and it sounds just like they're basically the same oscillators that are stacked right on top of each other. And what you're doing when you change the tuning just slightly is it slightly moves the waveforms so that they're not stacked on top of each other and just amplifying each other. It slightly changes it so that the waveforms are running kind of alongside of each other versus on top of each other. So let's just start changing the tuning. But maybe I should turn it on first. Nick, that is a good question, but the fine-tuning numbers are, they're just, I'm reading the actual description on what the numeric thing is, but it's 0 to 1,000. It said fine sets the ratio in fractions of whole numbers. So basically, it's just a percentage. So because this is a full step, and that's just bringing it up a whole step. And this is just basically bending the pitch in between there. But if you got all the way up to 1,000, check this out. If you went from here, now let's listen to it on 2. That's what it sounds like. But if you go to 1 and then you brought it all the way up, that would effectively be 2. Same sound. But everything else in between. So now you're starting to feel like a little bit of personality coming out of this preset, which again is the minor 7th chord lead that is in the operator presets. Okay? Now, let's start adding another one, but let's take it away and gradually introduce it. Again, it is a saw wave, 32. So let's just do this. Let's bring down, again, all the fine tuning on these, and it just sounds like the exact same wave that's stacked on top of each other. Okay? So once you start messing with this tuning, you can take the exact same 3 oscillators and radically change the sound by messing with the tuning here. So this would obviously be a half step that you're raising it. Okay, so you can just hear how radically it transforms just by messing with the tune. You're doing nothing more than that. One thing to keep in mind is when you're playing with the tune and you're creating, it doesn't really matter with the notes you're playing. So let's do like, for example, a C major scale. Doesn't matter, but relative to other things, they might not be in the same tune. So that's something to be aware of. Like sometimes you say, well, I've got everything in C or C minor. And for those who know nothing about music theory, you are in luck because the technology has gotten so good that it does everything except write the music for you. So there's a scale plugin. And let's just do something real basic like C minor. That was me. I'm playing on a keyboard a C major scale, and this scale plugin says, don't allow any notes or shift every note so that it fits onto the C minor scale. So if I turn it off, it's this. But if I turn it on, then it becomes a minor. So, and then you can start playing around with chords. Just play around. And I'm using Push just because it's a lot easier for me to interface with while working with all of you. But now we've got something that I used to always do this. I used to always just have one note playing, right? But what I found is that it's a little bit more inspiring if I got a chord going. So, and what you can do is now that's going to automatically loop. First thing, what's something that you're hearing when this is looping? There should be something that's standing out to you. What's standing out to you? And it's kind of annoying, right? Well, the thing that I'm hearing is the click. Yes, Brad. That is what I'm glad that everybody else was hearing the click. And that is a really good chance to dive into another very integral part of any synthesizer, and that is the attack, decay, sustain, release on the envelope. Okay? So let's hit play. Let's just bring this out a little bit more. and the filter also. So you can start changing the attack is something. Actually, let's do this. What I'm gonna do, and you can group this. If you just do this, if you right click on the synthesizer, you can group things. Instead of having to dive into each individual attack, but it'll be better if I just turn this off so you can have a better example of this. Now, do you see what it's doing? It's almost like this waveform is, you can almost visualize this, the way the audio travels on this line. Okay? Now let's bring it down. Now, you're hearing how quickly the note, it's just kind of like a ringing. But if you bring the attack out, okay, so that is a very important part of the amp. That's the amp envelope that is in the track. And then there's also something that can control the filter. This is the filter envelope that you're controlling. And this kind of determines when it opens and closes. And what I'm gonna do to demonstrate the filter envelope once I do this is I'm gonna move over to another synth that's within Ableton that you all have access to. So what I'm gonna do, you can click on this, I grouped the tracks, remember, click on map, take that and map it, okay? And then I'm gonna go to the next one, click on it, and I'm gonna map that same feature on each oscillator. Map it again, and map it again. Now, whenever I turn this, check this out. So if I turn it, I'll turn off the map function. Now you can see, no matter which oscillator I'm on, when I turn this, it controls all those attack parameters on all of the oscillators. Okay? Okay, so probably now that sorry for annoying you so much with that sound, but it's important to understand what this is doing. And you're gonna notice a lot more when you have different types of waveforms in the oscillator. So like, for example here, oh, kind of sounds like a hi-hat, doesn't it? Little bit. So these oscillators are now just generating noise, and you can hear that it's starting to make kind of a hi-hat sound. You can make every type of sound. I mean, every synthetic sound that you have in like a sample library started with the synthesizer. And many synthesizers can do many things, is worth noting. So, the more that you can understand the way synthesis works, the better off you'll be with being able to create the sound that you want to create. Okay? So, now I was talking about this filter envelope, and the best way that I can explain how the filter envelope works is I'm going to load up Wavetable here, okay? And what I'm going to do now is, because you can control your, let me just turn down this. I'm going to do a really basic. Now I'm gonna keep it at this, because one of the powerful things about this is you can shape this and modulate this in so many different ways. And the presets get pretty crazy. And again, I just randomly selected something. Let's put it in like a little bit of, so the detuning was a little bit too much. Okay, let's actually drop the same scale in, so we're always working in C minor. Paste that. So this right here is the filter. And what you're often hearing on synthesizers is a low pass filter. Nick, Wavetable is new in Live 10. You can either download the demo of Live 10, and that will have it, and you have a 90-day option on that. But really don't panic too much on this, because the reason I'm using Wavetable right now is to show you how the filter envelope behaves, okay? And the screen is a lot better, and there's a lot better of a visualization for how that behaves, okay? So don't panic too much, you can just follow along. Okay, I'm trying to pick something that's like a little bit less harsh on the ears. Okay. Okay, so let's change that to, we're just gonna bump this over because I didn't have the metronome on. And we're actually working in a really slow BPM, but that doesn't matter so much, because one of the things that I used to coach soccer, football for the rest of the world outside my homeland. And you'd have kids come to practice and they would just want to shoot the ball at the goal, you know? And it was a lot harder to teach them like fundamentals, but it was pulling teeth. And if you can learn the fundamentals right out of the gate, you're gonna be able to have a little bit of understanding, so that, because once you get started with the starter pack that I put up on my, you can go, if someone can post the link to the Dropbox, actually here, Linktree, if I can remember, there's a big Dropbox folder there, and just grab that, and there's a lot of treats to get you started. But you can start throwing in loops and start having something that sounds interesting. And what would be really nice is if you could go from having something interesting that you could then start transforming into your own, right? So let's do this. So I'm messing with the filter now. And these are different types of filter options. Play around with them, see how they sound. And what I want to show you is you can apply, so you've got the matrix here. Do you see, does everybody see how this is moving? Christian, welcome. Does everybody see how the filter's moving? I really love this about Wavetable. It's such a visual thing, and it's super helpful for learning new synthesis. Okay, so what I'm gonna show you is, basically I told this, and there's this little matrix here, and I told this, I want the amplifier envelope to affect the filter frequency. So basically I assigned an envelope to the filter. But you can assign, so here you have the amp envelope, you have the second envelope that you can assign to whatever, you have the third envelope. And all these are assignable things that you can assign to a number of different things. So actually, what I'd like to do is I'm going to assign this to, instead of doing this, so now it's going to stay still, right? Because it's not assigned to anything. Let's turn it up to here. And now, look how the filter's behaving. But if I bring that out, you can see kind of what it's doing, right? So if I bring the attack, this is the attack. If I do that, you see the filter kind of quickly move to open up, right? Because the attack is down to 0. But if I turn up the attack, you'll start seeing it slowly open up. Does that make sense? Is everybody tracking? Is this resonating with you all, or how's it going? Give me some feedback on what's going on. No, it's a little bit confusing on this, Nick, because the way that this is the initial, I can't really explain exactly what that does, except that it is not quite the attack. And that's an Ableton thing that you don't see on a lot. So just this tip right here is the initial. So yeah, I think if you actually bring that up, yeah, it's effectively doing kind of the same thing, but the initial hit decides it decides how long that initial hit holds out, and then basically just follow the path of the line. But for a lot of synths, you're just going to have the attack, decay, sustain, release. Yeah. So just ignore that part. So this is, and honestly, the way that they do the sustain is also slightly different. But if you just search on Wikipedia, if there's any confusion as to what the ADSR is doing, then look on Wikipedia as to what it's attack, decay, sustain, release. For piano players in the room, I think there is a sustain pedal on the piano, and there is a dampening pedal, and then I don't remember what, but the sustain pedal is basically doing, thank you, Stanislav. It's a gift from a friend. And yeah, so let's watch this filter again. And keep in mind, that's pretty different sounding than if you just have it like this without any filter. Another thing, with these envelopes, you can choose different settings for what you want, how you want them to behave. So if you notice, when I'm doing this, you have different ways to choose on if you want it to be triggered or looped or like none. So again, make sure you have this little info box on, and it can explain things a lot better than I can. But also I want to encourage you to, when you turn a knob, you're not going to blow up your computer. You're not going to break anything. So just turn the knob and see what it does. You don't need always a textbook understanding of what something does. All you need to really understand is, okay, what happens when I open up this knob and then I turn it down? Okay, sound pretty much goes away. And then I bring it up. Now you've got LFOs, and you can do all kinds of funky things with LFOs, which, again, every synthesizer, I wouldn't say every, I mean, there's synthesizers without a filter on them, but there's actually very expensive synthesizers without a filter on them. But for the most part, you're gonna have a filter and you're gonna have LFOs on synthesizers. And oscillators, or in this case, wavetables, which are behaving like oscillators. But LFOs get interesting because this is also very visual. If I turn off, let's turn off this, the amplifier, so it's just sitting still. But now let's do the LFO. Okay. Now let's just get really drastic on this. And normally you're not doing things that drastic. So you're gonna bring in the amount. You can give it just like a little bit of flutter. And you can change the shape of it. Sample those bells in the background, yeah. I'll never forget when first got my dog and we would take him out to go to the bathroom, and training a puppy to go outside. They'll happily go inside when they're first born, but they're super timid and it's a busy street. And I remember one night I was outside in the grassy area where he would not go to the bathroom for like 90 minutes, and he had started to squat, and then the church bells went off, and I thought, oh no, full reset. Just didn't happen. So, all right, sorry for that afterthought. So you've got this LFO that you can obviously hear what it's doing. Maybe I'll turn it down a little bit just to have it kind of move in and out there. And if you look, it's kind of resetting there. And that is because you have the re-trigger option turned on. So now it's not re-triggering. The re-trigger means that anytime it detects a new note, which would be here, it's gonna go back to the beginning point of this LFO sequence. Clear as mud on that, everybody? Okay. So we're gonna add that filter frequency again. And you can do all kinds of things. You can add another filter and do all kinds of funky stuff with it. But I'm going to turn that off anyway. Okay, so we've got it kind of set up. Okay, now let's start loading in drums. And the drum rack is really fun because you can just start dumping in samples. And again, in the Dropbox link on Linktree, there's a link in that Linktree link that you can get the Dropbox, the starter, I think it's called the Ableton Starter Pack. And you can download that and you're gonna have samples ready to roll out of the gate. So let's go over to the samples. And I've got them in my own little sample folder, but I'll just make sure to only use samples that have been given to all of us. feel free to send a message to any of the people using the samples and tell them that they've been really useful if you find them useful. They donated a lot of their time and energy to make this possible and have been just super supportive of what's going on. So I'm going to use a truncate bass drum. This might be, it might not fit, but all you have to do is just drag files into the drum rack and you can assign what part of the drum rack it is. If you want to move up octaves, you just move on the side, those little grids, but I'm just going to work within this because we don't have many samples. And this might be one of those, good evening, Oliver, good to see you. This might be one of those, yeah, truncate kicks are popular amongst producers because truncate David is a phenomenal engineer and he keeps things super simple because he's able to absolutely maximize each element of his tracks. And that's how those tracks can be so explosive and so simple at the same time, is because every part of a truncate track is honed in on and thought about, and there's nothing in a truncate track that's just thrown in there just because, you know. So now we've got this going. And the nice thing about the drum rack that I love versus third-party plugins is that it knows what the sample is, so I can see on the piano roll. And by the way, just so everybody knows, just double click on that and it creates a new MIDI file or a MIDI clip. Okay? So now, right now, I only have one sample and I am already clipping. So I'm going to bring down the volume. If you ever need to bring down the volume on everything, you can highlight everything. It's a lot of the shortcuts and stuff on Ableton are very similar to if you were working in Microsoft Word or working at the office and you just would shift and then click and then you've got all of these selected and then you can bring down all the volumes at the same time. Okay? So, Nick Taylor, the question is, I've been using Impulse for percussion. Is there an advantage to using drum rack instead? In short, the short explanation is absolutely. And the reason why, if you pull up, let's just pull up Impulse in the window next to this. Impulse is another drum machine. Impulse was invented before the drum racks were invented. And so Impulse to me is kind of just a legacy plugin. It's not, if you're gonna learn from scratch, then I would say just load up drum racks because, and for a long time I was using Impulse as well. But you have so much more power over the samples. One thing I will say though is loading up 8 samples into Impulse is gonna be way less processor intensive. You just lose a lot of flexibility with it. So you can see, you can change the start time, you can transpose it, you can stretch it, which actually I don't think you can stretch in Sampler. So you can get a little bit of interesting things out of that, but it just has the decay, pan, volume, and you can assign like a drive, and I think that I don't even think. There's like a randomization thing that's pretty cool, but there's other ways that you can do that in drum rack. So drum rack, you have all these different controls over every sample and just a lot more. So now we've got that's a good answer, Andrew. So we've got a real basic kick drum. And just so you know that the like 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, those are the beats. Tempo is up here, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously. I want to make sure that everybody has any ability to ask any question during this. Does anybody have any questions? Nick, you've been asking some really good questions, so glad you're involved. Okay. Just to explain real quick what I did when I turned this knob. These are called sends. And the reason they're called send is because you're sending audio to a different channel. And these are called return tracks over here. So if you turn this off, actually, and you just hit, let's do this. And I can do this post, pre. So I'll just show you. It just is sending audio the same. So if I turn this knob up, it decides how much audio I'm sending there. So why do you have those is the next reasonable question. Because you can put effects on it and then you can pass audio through effects. Yeah, this is Ableton 101. Welcome. And let me just say for those who, there are like, if people are looking for more like advanced discussions, a lot of times on Twitch, I'm just producing normally and kind of shooting the breeze and talking with the chat room, and they're asking questions, and then I give input, and then I ask them questions, and yeah, it's a nice little community. So if you're looking for something deeper, then definitely I would encourage you to hop on Twitch TV/Kyle Geiger. But let's turn this up. So remember, this is just sending audio to this channel. So I had a really interesting conversation with someone that's just learning Ableton, and they had made a really good point. They said, well, why not? The question was, for those who can't see or just listening, this is from Tim Van Hoorneveder, I think is the correct pronunciation. I think I'm pretty close. Welcome, Tim. I always tend to use the session view all the time, but fail to build a decent arrangement and stick to the loops in session view. At what point would you switch? It's going to sound like a cop-out answer, but that's really boiling down to how you work. And the interesting conversation I had with someone that is just learning Ableton is, for them, they said you start in session and then you switch to arrangement. So like every track that I ever make ends in arrangement view. Thank you, Tim. I'm trying. My Dutch is very limited. My Dutch phonetics. I'm just doing kind of a German phonetic thing, but lots of O's in there. So I start in session and then go to arrangement, and every track eventually ends in arrangement view. And for those of you who are wondering, arrangement, if you just hit the tab key, switches over to kind of a sequencing grid. And the question is when should I move over to arrangement view? Tim, if you're having trouble with arrangement, making that jump, there's two things you can do. For one, you can create kind of an atmosphere in session view that keeps things moving along. So it can kind of create inspiration. So let's do something really simple here. I've got to load up a few things on the drum rack. I'll get the little mood music playing while I'm there. Drum beat. So let's get another. Let's get some hi-hats in here. No, I want that to be down here. Let's load up this. And again, for those just joining, all these samples are available in the Dropbox folder. So let's say we do this, and stop me if you've already done this. I'm gonna bring this down, and I'm gonna send this, and I'm gonna turn on the reverb here. So I'm getting some reverb. Now we've got some hi-hats here. And I'm just doing this kind of as a demonstration as to what you do. So you can actually start kind of creating or synthesizing an arrangement in session view. The reason, just to clarify, the reason I started in session view was I was a DJ before I was a producer. And so production to me was always something that didn't quite work with the way like I visually had first experienced techno music. So I saw faders and then like knobs and all this. And when I first got Ableton, I said, this makes sense. So you can actually, and I had a Midi controller that I could trigger clips and stuff and kind of DJ with my own sounds. And that was how I got into production. So I would always record a jam in session view with a Midi controller, and then hit tab and see what the results were, and then start chopping up from there. But someone that had talked to me, they said, for me, arrangement view makes a lot more sense. And we were discussing this, and she's a classically trained musician, traditionally trained musician, can read sheet music and understands that flow. And if you're trained with that stuff, you're actually you're reading music from left to right, and the arrangement view is a little bit more of a familiar format. You have like left to right, you can say, okay, here's the kick, we'll put a kick drum in here, here's the bass, here's where the bass starts, and this is more like conducting a symphony or something, and this feels a lot more like a DJ type format or a mixing console format. So, yeah, so what you can do if you're struggling with the session view and converting over to that, let's just get this going. Whoops, okay. So now I've got a hi-hat here, and I don't know what it's gonna sound like, but then take that, let's change the color so we can keep our ducks in order. And then click on that new clip, duplicate it, so now you've got this. Now you can just go in and let's just do this. And what you can do, I don't know if you've ever used this function, But what you can do is you've got, if you click on the little L down in your MIDI clip, that opens the launch view or the launch mode. You can have different funky things happen here. And what I would encourage you to do is set up follow actions. So this says, this is bars, beats, sixteenths, right? So let's just set it to 4 bars. So once we do the 4 bars of follow action, we can assign it to something else. We can say after 4 bars, we want it to stop. So let's just see what it does. Last one, and now it stops. But let's say we don't want it to stop. Let's say we actually want it to go to the next one. Okay? And let's see what it does now. Okay, didn't touch anything. Bring down the volume just a little bit. Now let's do the same for this. Let's do the next on this. Now see how it's already selected? It's already queued up for what's next. Let's duplicate this. And we've got also, so now we've got, I mean, it's very, very basic. And I'm just doing this to illustrate what you can do. So we've got follow actions. So let's make sure these follow actions are set up. But let's do next on this one too. And then on this one, we can set up the follow action, but let's have it, because we can't do the next because there's no next. So what we can do is we can do any or other. I would say let's just do other, okay? And other means obviously that it can't re-trigger itself, but it can re-trigger any clip. So let's just start it and get it going here. Okay, so for me right now, I would say we're just gonna re-trigger within the, I wish there was a way to exclude one from the action, because it would be nice to not have the basic kick go. But let's just move that over there so it's not causing any problems. And we're just gonna select other on all of these so that it'll kind of move back and forth randomly between them. And the reason I do that is now you've got, if you're getting stuck on loops, now you've basically made it to always have some kind of movement and you're still in session view, right? So now you're able to work and get a little bit further, making a track in session view without having to make that jump. And then once you start doing that, once you start arranging stuff, now you're gonna see how it behaves on the sequencing grid in arrangement view. So you've got all that there. So what I would say now is actually let's just move these over. We're gonna just keep this loop going right now because I like it. I'm gonna start diving in, messing with this a little bit. So truncate sounds are so unique. There's not a lot of, you're not gonna find this type of pad in a truncate track necessarily. And the nature of the truncate sounds are making me wanna make something a little bit loopier than what this would be. So let's just try it out. Let's go. I just duplicated this. The filter is such a powerful tool, by the way. So let's duplicate this loop. But maybe we could even make this a little bit shorter. And we're gonna make this a little bit meaner. Okay, I forget what this. So now we've got this. So now we've got a really tracky groove going on here. Oliver, what are you talking about? Reverb, like the stuff in Reason? So now we've got a little bit of a groove going with, and again, this is super simple. You've got kind of like this old Chicago vibe here just by, this was originally a lead synth and now it's been kind of transformed just by playing around with some of the parameters. It's been changed into kind of a jacky Chicago sound. But I don't think I'll keep that. And you can change the signal path of all the oscillators in Operator. Any questions going on here? Nick, I'm glad that the follow action was helpful for you. Bring down the release a little bit. Christian, that's really the plan of what I'm doing on Twitch, actually. That's a good question. There is the plan is on Twitch is I'm just kind of constructing tracks and opening up my studio process for people to come in and check it out. And yeah, that's what we're doing. Any questions now? Something that this has like now become kind of a bell sound in Wavetable. This type of sound you can really push with the saturator, which is an Ableton audio effect. So if you go down here, you can just test it out and see what it does. Question from Nick is, do you typically use a Midi keyboard or push to do piano roll and drum sequencing? Nick, it depends. I mean, I go through phases. So there was like a time where I always was, the first tracks, the first records I made were done strictly on a keyboard, like computer keyboard and mouse. I was just clicking and trial and error and all of this. So it depends, but now I have push too, and actually I needed kind of a makeshift setup while we were on this self-isolation period, and the studio is pretty far away, so I thought bring Push and have that kind of be another thing that I can put my hands on since I don't have access to the full studio. But I kind of go back and forth. And the question that Miranda has, Miranda, welcome. How do you know what key to make the sounds in? Does filtering change the key? No, filtering does not change the key, but it changes the sound. But so it can be tricky because it can make the key clashes less noticeable, but the sonics still, like if you're filtering something down, it'll make it less noticeable, but the sonics still won't fit. So like that's a big thing with the kick and the bass. It's not necessarily super noticeable if it's not in key, especially with a lot of techno tracks, because you don't have these really sculpted bass lines or defined bass lines. Sometimes it's just something to push the kick along, but even when you're doing that, if it's not in the right key, if they're not the right frequencies together, it's like gears that are like not locking in. So that's a big thing. Christian has a good suggestion with the plug-in tuner, which is right here. You can check that. So you can see what it's doing here. Another thing that I do is if you just joined, if you're not sure what key things are in, there's the scale plugin in the Midi effects. And you can just pick a scale, find one that you enjoy, and then you can apply it to everything. The tricky thing is with the scale, and I said this before, just make sure that your semitones are not off, because if you start messing with the tones or the steps of the synth, then that can change the tuning of it. So the fine tuning, you can get some. I have a very minimal amount of detuning going on here, and the detuning just gives it a little bit more of life instead of having. So you're not really changing things too much by doing that if you don't deviate too far out of tune. So Miranda, did that help with that question? That's a little too much distortion there. Yeah. And I have to say, sometimes the tuner struggles, but in this case, it's actually doing pretty well. I mean, it's not always gonna know. It's gonna be taking the frequency that stands out the most to it. But yeah. Any other questions? Any questions? So you can also, some of the filter options here, you can select between clean, OSR, which is the Oscar, MS2, which is the MS20, SMP, which I don't remember, PRD, which I don't remember, and you can do, it emulates old filters from different synthesizers. And like I've said before, they can't use the actual name of the synthesizers because there's copyright infringements. But by saying MS2, everybody knows, you can figure it out that it's an MS-20. So it's an interesting thing, Nick. So yeah, EQing to me, what I always say is something that I always encourage people to mess with before EQing is tuning frequencies and the volume of frequencies. Because a lot of times we get so surgical with EQing that we carve the life out of the sound when really the sound just needs to be a different pitch. And that can be a big factor. But no, I don't have a rule. I don't have a rule with when to start EQing. It's not a thing. Like, for example, this sound right here, this has a lot of low end that's not necessary. So let's just pull up the EQ8. So yeah, you can see that low end being kind of swallowed up, and you can always see the fundamental frequencies here on the EQ8 by where it's spiking right there. So this all, watch, I'll be able to EQ all of this out, and it doesn't change the sound hardly at all. Now if I go past that, then it really starts changing it. But between here and here, there's not much sound change, but you're creating a ton of space for other stuff to pass through in this frequency range. Yeah, I mean, think about, Nick, think about when you see like, let me pull up, let's pull up a really nice mixing console. So, for example, I mean, think about it like this. You got this really nice mixing console, and now the technology's there. You could put it in any arrangement that you wanted to. There is a very clear reason why the EQ knobs are first in order, or the volume faders are first. Like, that's gonna be the first thing, that's the first thing to reach for when something's not fitting in the mix right, you know? Reach for the faders first. They're the closest to your body. And that's by design. And then start working your way up. And that makes a big difference, right? So I think it's become so easy to, such a nice little mixing console that I can't afford. But pay attention to that. I mean, there's a reason for that. And there's a reason, like, for example, if you get a Motorized Faders from Pro Tools or DigiDesign, they have two functions. Let me just pull up the DigiDesign one. My brother-in-law is a professional mix engineer, and he just upgraded his studio to these faders, and this is what they are. You've got volume, and obviously you can bounce through these, but these are historically pan knobs. So those are the two different ways you can make space the easiest. It's not through EQing, actually. It's through volume, and, well, first you have to assume that, make sure that you've got the tuning in order, and then volume, and then panning. And that's going to create so much space that you can accomplish with an EQ, but if you can avoid, the EQ is kind of the last resort, right? And I'm not against EQ. Like, this, EQs are great for this because all of this space right here is completely unnecessary. Doesn't change the sound whenever I scale it back like that, right? Let me make this bigger. Doesn't change the sound hardly at all. But if I start saying, okay, if I've got something hidden here in another sound, I have a decision to make. I have to decide if I'm going to EQ this, that's what it's going to sound like to get that frequency out. Fundamentally changes the sound. So the better option would be to either choose one of the sounds to occupy in the space and then choose a different sound or a different pitch of a sound for the other part of the space. So, yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong. Sometimes it sounds so dope that you want to be surgical with it, and you say, okay, I've got to make this fit. Let's try to make it work. But also be open to the idea that sometimes something's got to go, and it's that old story of, I don't know, it's kind of a brutal story, but like, if you have to cut off like a lot of the life of two different sounds to make them fit, wouldn't it be better to decide which one is better to stay in the track in its full presence than to have kind of half measures of two sounds that you like? Because then once you start getting too surgical, then you're gonna start liking the sound a lot less. Like, I don't like this sound anymore if it's like that. It sounds weak, it sounds flimsy, but when it's hitting like this, I like it. Is it good to copy your hi-hats on a second channel, put them completely left and right, and create space in the middle of the spectrum? Yeah, I mean, panning is something, I don't know why, but panning's something I do oftentimes last. I do know why. Because as you're adding sounds, different panning arrangements are going to be needed. So panning is really good for creating space, but with stuff that's central to the groove, I try not to get too crazy with the panning. So like I'd probably do, let's do this one right here, for example. Let's pan that a little to the right. No, that's the bass drum. Definitely don't want to pan that. So I've got that. And let's pan this one to the left. But I kind of want to keep this, because this in the center and the kick drum in the center can, as a general rule, coexist, right? But that's a really good question, Christian. So yeah, any questions for those? I'm gonna wrap this up, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save this. I want to save it as, and I'm gonna do Ableton Solutions, save, and I'm gonna collect all and save. And we're gonna actually, let me just put a date on this so that it doesn't get too confusing. What's today's date? Anybody? I guess I've got a computer, but yeah. May 9th. May 9, 2020. So, okay, I think I've got a lot of US people in the room. We're gonna do the date first and then the month. That's how we roll in the rest of the world. Took some getting used to, but now I'm kind of accustomed to it. Makes more sense to put the day first. I don't understand why the month would go first. So saving this, and then I'm gonna drop this into my Dropbox folder right now. If I can find it. Where did I save this? That's the big question. Okay. Any questions while I'm uploading this? I am struggling with where I save this stuff now. Maybe it's in documents, maybe it's in downloads. Where on earth did I save this? Any questions? What's my favorite style of techno? I like it all. Christian, I play a lot of longer sets, all things being equal. And, you know, I've always been of the mindset, I really love people like Laurent Garnier and Danny Tenaglia, who have the ability to play, a Jeff Mills track and an Adonis track in the same set, you know. So I really like kind of the whole spectrum, and I'm not just saying that to make everybody feel good. There's great techno in every department. Kaiser Disco, how you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for the nice words. But yeah, I like all kinds of techno. When I was younger, I was a lot snobbier about the techno I listened to. And I was a lot more dogmatic and like, oh, real techno is only this and blah, blah, blah. And I learned that I missed out on a lot of opportunity by closing myself off. So that was also the thing. So in the last year, in the last year, is there a habit or belief that has really improved your life producing in the studio? Nick, it's the faders that I started using. I was always penciling in the faders into like I was penciling, if I did any kind of volume automation, it was completely outside of that. And yeah, I never was able to have that tactile feel, and it made me kind of approach the way I worked very different. It's really crazy. So that was a huge thing for me. Any other questions? Questions. I'm going to have to save this again because I have no idea where this went. Ableton Sessions. It's in Ableton Sessions. It's in today. Unbelievable. Save. Replace. Yeah. I've just started going in the direction of the world of the cloud, and sometimes I cannot find anything on. I still haven't fully embraced everything, and sometimes it's just a real pain in the. Don't know if there's kids in the room, so you get what I'm saying. Remy, what effects do I use for vocals? I'm such a novice when it comes to vocals. I'm not working a ton with vocals, and actually that's going to be one of the upcoming. I've been doing these little videos. If you look on, I'll just share the YouTube link. All these sessions are archived on YouTube, and I've got a lot of producer friends who are giving tips, like little tidbits, really simple tips for the studio and your creative process. And you can go to the YouTube channel, and it's all archived there. And I'm gonna bring in some more house-oriented producers, and one of the producers I've asked about talking. They use a lot of vocals, so one of the ideas that I had and need to talk with this person in more detail about what they want to talk about. It's ultimately up to them, but it would be nice to have some commentary on vocals, and I'm trying to get a little bit more tips from people that aren't just in the avenue of techno that I'm making. So, yeah. Questions? Concerns? Feedback? Anything? Do you have a trick with it? For the one in Ableton is difficult to work with. The funny thing is the vocoder I've never used for vocals, actually. I've used the vocoders actually for doing, I've used the vocoders for doing different stuff, but nothing of the sort where I process vocals. Like I do drums. You can get some cool stuff with processing drums with the vocoder, get some nice textures in there. But yeah, I've never done that. Do you have any tips, trick to sit a snare better in the mix? Sometimes the snare is the right volume, but popping up too much. Compression not seeming to help so well. Raphael, good to see you. The that's kind of a case by case scenario. What are you finding that when you bring the snare up, and what happens if the snare volume is a little bit lower? Do you find it gets kind of lost, and do you feel like it's interfering with the kick, or what's keeping you from how's it behaving when you lower the volume? Parallel compression. I have a friend of mine that I say friend, I would say more acquaintance, but someone that I really respect and has been in the music production world for a very long time, and he's actually gonna talk about parallel compression for all of you in the producer tips. Oliver Hinkle, I wanted to produce some stuff like Dave Tipper, but have no clue how to build something like that. Tried sometimes, but it ends in nothing. Oliver, all I can offer is I can check out Dave Tipper and see what kind of music that is, and go from there. So anyways, I'm gonna upload. I really don't know where this folder is saving. This is frustrating. But I'm glad that questions are still coming. So let's go here. Let's do production workshops, Macintosh hard drive. Oh, that's so annoying. Gosh, Ableton sessions. Where is it saving? It is in security. This is a really weird. This is the most chaotic thing I have ever experienced. So we're gonna save it into Dropbox. And we're gonna collect all and save. And now we will have something in here. I'm still getting familiar with this new audio or new operating system from Mac, and the file system is slightly different. Like where it's putting files, I have no idea where it's putting stuff. So that's why I don't know how to save my own documents, if some of you are questioning my intelligence. Do I miss performing or like being home and doing what you do now? It seems like you really love doing it. I'm a fan. Thank you, Christian. You know what? I've always loved teaching. I actually, whenever I first had opportunity with music, I had kind of had some lucky breaks, and things looked like they had some potential to where I could be traveling for gigs and doing tours and stuff. But they weren't stable enough to where I could ever just live off of music alone. So I was a registered substitute teacher in school, and it was the perfect job. I love teaching. I love working with the younger generations, lots of teenagers, and especially really at-risk teenagers. And man, it was great because I could choose the days that I wanted to work, and then I could literally disappear to Europe for 2 or 3 weeks to do some gigs and come back. And because there would still be times I would do a European tour, like 4 gigs or something, and then I would come back and maybe I wouldn't have another gig for 6 weeks or 7 weeks. And so I needed something to kind of supplement that income. And I really fell in love with teaching through that process. And I always wanted to incorporate more of like a teaching type vibe in with music stuff. I really value sharing knowledge. I think education is one of the most important things for lifting people out of uncomfortable cycles and whatnot. But music has kind of been something that people have so closely guarded as their own secrets and their own things. And I've got to be honest, the more I teach, the better a producer I become. So I just love doing it. I'm having a lot of fun. I miss gigs. I miss gigs a lot. I miss clubs. I miss all that, like we all do. But I'm enjoying this. So I'm glad it seems apparent. So yeah, Rhino, nice shirt. Thank you. So I got a compliment on this shirt because someone saw it. And Ryan Henderson is in the building, and he is the king of getting shirts that you didn't even know existed. And I don't know how he gets these shirts. I don't want to ask, but he always, every time I come back and visit in the US, we're always going out to eat and doing random stuff. And he was able to always give me some nice studio swag. So would you use limiters on snares to make them cut their volume at some point, and this way make them feel more squared? I mean, Raphael, that's when you can use compression and limiting as kind of a creative tool. It doesn't always have to be something that it comes down to, does it sound better or worse once you're done with it? Yeah. So, thank you, Nick. Thank you. Do you use Reason in Ableton? Oliver, I used to use Reason a long time ago, and now they've started making Reason as a VST, so I would love to get it back in, but my registration is back in the US and I can't find it. So upgrading's a little bit of a task right now. Andrew, my late father taught me as a kid that I didn't truly understand something until I could teach someone else. It's a great way to embed knowledge and to highlight ourselves gaps in our own knowledge. Thank you for sharing. You're welcome, Andrew. Sorry about your father. My father passed away when I was 17. Was one of the most life-changing events in my life. One of the most traumatizing events. So can definitely empathize with that. And thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I hope that we can keep doing this. And really, I cannot find this where I have saved this file. So it will be in the Dropbox folder. I just need a little bit of time. So feel free to send me questions. In the meantime, definitely go on twitch.tv, and there's different things that you can follow me on. I'll post the link one more time down here, and I will sign on off. But yeah, there's Twitch, and YouTube has all the old workshops are archived on YouTube, and so you can subscribe to that, and that'll get you on board with that. Twitch is, again, me just kind of inviting you into the studio and hanging out. So we will talk soon, and send me questions if you have any. Much love.